Okay, everyone, shalom. It's February 3rd, 2025. This is Parshat Beshalah. We are in the middle of the book of Bamidbar. Book of Bamidbar. We're in the book of Shmot, not Bamidbar. I'll edit that out. Shmot. And we are at the Exodus. We are coming out of Egypt. Um, I want to pick up on a theme that I began last week. And I've been thinking about this over the years in terms of how to present the Exodus story. Um, and it's really on the theme of time. And looking at the story, we've examined the story from so many different aspects. But it seems to me that a useful way of a useful strategy in examining the text and a test like this is asking, well, what's the timeline? How is the story unfolding, and can you put a timestamp on different events in the story? And if you can, then what emerges is a set of themes, and of course, a way to imagine the story, appreciate the story, and as we'll see, perhaps, and this is the big question that I'll hold out for your debate later, which is, does this is this imprinted in the Bible itself in terms of how we understand redemption, how we understand morning and evening, daytime and nighttime, and how these themes play themselves out in the Bible? Am I making too much out of this? Are these universal themes altogether and not particular themes? Maybe there's something to that. So I want to just explore this with you, and we'll go back to last week for a second and look at the parsha. Look at what happened at night. Here we go. So it's in the middle of the night. Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, v'Adonai yika kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, bechor paro asher v'kiso, bechor hashvi asher b'veit tabor, bechor behema. So it was in the middle of the night. God struck down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon, and every firstborn of the beast, every firstborn of beast. Okay, so the timestamp is night. It's the middle of the night. Okay, b'chatzi halayla. So we imagine, we don't have a clock here ticking away, and we don't measure time in the Bible the way we measure time now with, a big hand and a little hand. But there is astronomical time, and there is, of course, time as experienced by nature, that is to say, sunset and sunrise, or sunrise and sunset. So the breaking of the day at dawn and the end of the day at night. And there are different systems of time. That is, times the from sunset to sunrise, dividing that into units, and of course, dividing sunrise to sunset in different units. We still use these time methods today in halachic timing, hours. So, for example, um, the most
Mm.
definitive one that we have is the candlelighting time. Candlelighting time is 18 minutes before sunset. It's fine. Sunset is the beginning of Shabbat. We always make it 18 minutes to, prevent one from violating Shabbat, giving, a kind of period of time before as a, just in case. But that's the timing. The timing is sunset. Sunrise, this comes, it gets really complicated at Passover, because the day before Passover, you're supposed to burn your chametz by a certain time, and you're supposed to you're not allowed to eat chametz by a certain time. And those times change every year because they are dependent on halachic hours. Halachic hours, an halachic hour is the time of daylight divided by 12 units of daylight. So if the simplest system is if sunrise is at 6 a.m. and sunrise is at 6 p.m., then you have 12 hours of daylight. And so one halachic hour is one clock hour. But what if it's 6 o'clock sunrise and it's 9 o'clock sunset? Well, you have 15 hours of daylight and 12 units. So it'd be 15 divided by 12, which is 1 hour and 1/4 hour. So that's 1 hour and 3/12 of an hour, 1 and 1/4 hours. So that means that a halakhic hour is 1 hour and 15 minutes. If you have three of those by which you need to, do certain things, or four of those by which after which you cannot eat chametz, and if sunrise at 6 o'clock, and if you have 4 hours, so that's really 5 hours, so that's 11. Okay. Now that I've confused all of you, what I mean to say is that time, we still have these patterns of timekeeping, and I have, lots of chart. In fact, I have one on my desk right here. This is the chart of all the different times. The time we have dawn, 72, the earliest time you can put a tallis on, sunrise. The latest time for you to say the Shema, midday, mincha, all these times, sunset, nightfall, when the three stars come out, etc. And that's all done, and you can have, we have that all done pretty easily because the charts and the tables and the sunset, the sunrise, that's all determined by data that we get from the observatory. Okay, so there, it's the middle of the night. It's whatever that middle of the night is. We would like to say precisely at the middle of the night, namely in hour 6 of the 12 units of nighttime time. But that's a conjecture. It's the midpoint of the night. That's
חצי זה חצות.
Chatzi Halayla and
חצות,
Chatzot.
חצות
We
is usually midnight.
exactly, but midnight in the modern era is 12 o'clock midnight, okay, by a clock. In the ancient era, there's no such thing as a clock. So there's no such thing as 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. There's midnight. Otherwise, the Bible would have had it, right? You know, the Bible has the fourth day of the moon, the month, you
But
know.
but but some but
Yes,
today instead of saying 12 midnight, we say chatzot,
we say
and it's
chatzot.
understood that it's 12 midnight.
And that's the beauty of the Hebrew language is that when you say a word chatzot, you're harking back to an era where there is no clock. Okay. All right. So we'll go on. So that the event happens in the middle of the night. Pharaoh rose at night, sometime during this whole event, and he and all his servants. There was a great cry for which there was not a house in which there was not one dead. He had Moshe and Aaron called in the night. Okay. So it's still nighttime. It's dark. Get up and go out from my people. Okay. So in the middle of the night, the children of Israel moved on. Okay. So I skipped a few verses there. They rustle up their things and they go. By the end of that chapter, it says the children of Israel moved on from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot, men folk apart from little ones, and a mixed multitude went up with them, along with sheep and oxen. Now they baked the dough, which they had brought out of Egypt, into matzah cakes. And I make a whole big deal about the fact that they did not eat the night before. So what happened? They slaughtered their sheep, they put the blood on the doorposts, and they're roasting and roasting and roasting. But Pharaoh tells them to leave, and they leave in the middle of the night. The lamb is not fully roasted, it's not ready for them to eat. And so they can't eat it. But what they have is the dough prepared for the unleavened bread. And that's what they take with them on their way out. And when they get to Rams from Sukkot, the name is of the place called Sukkot, they baked the dough which they had brought of Egypt into matzah cake, for it had not fermented, for they had been driven out of Egypt and were not able to linger. The story is they couldn't stay there and bake it at night. So they wrap it up in their cloaks, put it in bowls, and they walk out. So the question I have reading this is, well, what time is it? At what time do they bake the bread? Do they break the bread at night or do they bake the bread in the morning? It doesn't say, okay? But here's what it does say. Neither had they made the provisions for themselves. Now, the settlement of Israel, of the children of Israel in Egypt, which they had settled in Egypt, was 30 years and 400 years. It was the end of 30 years and 400 years. Be'etzem hayom hazeh, on that same day, all of God's forces went out from the land of Egypt. So what we have here is a kind of, you know, it's mixed up. We have evening and we have daytime. It doesn't say boker, it doesn't say shemesh, but it says leil shimurim hu ladonai. It is a night of keeping watch for God, lo tziam eretz Mitzrayim, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Hu alayla hazeh ladonai shimurim. This is the night for God, a keeping watch of all the children of Israel, l'chol bnei Israel l'dorotam, for all the generations. It was on that same day that God brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their forces. So what we have here is we know something happened at night because it tells us, and you don't stay in night all the time, and the day happens. So we are left to offer this speculation, this conjecture, which is not explicit in the text, but it's a deduction. The deduction is they travel all night, they get to a place where they can stop, and they've separated themselves for the period of time that they could go during the night, and they get to a place by the morning, and that's when they bake their matzot. So the matzot are not eaten at night; they're eaten sometime late in the evening, perhaps already by morning. And they start the new dawn, the new era, with eating matzah. So this is why my interpretation of this, I'm interpreting and saying, what we're doing on the Seder, really, by eating matzah, is commemorating the first taste of freedom. Okay, that eating matzah is the commemoration of the first act of freedom, the first act of collective, eating, where everybody's doing this. Now, I always make the point of saying that the biblical matzot are probably not the matzot that we eat. We eat stale, we eat crackers, dried crackers that are matzah. But if you do the experiment that I always, advise people to do in teaching this text, is that if you were to make a dough and not let it leaven and roll it out, 1 second, roll it out and poke holes in it and put it on a pan and put it in a hot oven, it would come out as a kind of flatbread, not necessarily as a cracker, but as something that is quite pliable and spongy and actually tastes good. In other words, a, a bread made from flour and water only that's rolled out to the consistency of a bread or a light bread actually is quite malleable and could be an interesting kind of, it's a way to wrap a roasted meat with herbs. So the eating that they're supposed to do is a very primitive meal that consists of a bread, roasted meat, and a condiment, and that's the fortifying meal, the symbolic meal that they're supposed to take. And they were supposed to eat it at night, but instead they eat it at morning. And when we eat matzah at the Seder, we are commemorating that consumption. Go ahead, Annette. Unmute. Yeah.
Okay. So apparently, time is very important to the Jews. In fact, I think a few parshas ago, God gave the calendar to the Israeli slaves coming out of, Egypt, because when you're a slave, you don't really have to, time is not your own. Time is your taskmaster. So I find it really interesting that you're focused on, Rabbi, um, that they're doing their time by, AM, by daylight, midnight, whatever, because time in general uh, is, I guess, it was started by the calendar,
Well,
according to the
so
Parsha.
so exactly, we have different systems of time here. The calendar time is the unit of days, and how we organize the different seasons, and that actually is a very fascinating subject, worthy. I mean, I've watched a lot of lectures on this in Hebrew by people who, investigate the deep historical sources pre the Bible on how people counted time and how people measured months. In antiquity, whether it was, our system of months is quite different. We follow the Gregorian calendar. 31 days of this month, 30 days of this month, etc., etc. When the lunar months are 29, 30, 29 or 30 days, depending on which month it is. But the lunar cycle is a pretty regular cycle. And the um, uh, the problem with the lunar year, as we know, was that 12 of those months don't add up to 365. They come close. 12 times 29 or 30 is like 360, maybe 358. So what happens if you want to keep the months lined up with the seasons? You have to add some days here, and that's the leap year in the Jewish calendar. But we're talking here about the daytime and nighttime, and so what's lost on us often when we read these stories is, exactly what's happening when. So my reconstruction of the night of the Exodus is that they emerge in the morning, and they're baking the bread in the morning, and they're resting in the morning, and that conforms to a certain literary frame, which is that this is a new period. This is a new thing that happens in the morning. That the transition of between the transition from slavery to freedom happens overnight to the morning. I read, today in the obituaries, Marion Wiesel passed away, Elie Wiesel's wife. So that reminds me of Elie Wiesel, his famous memoir, Night. Why does he call it Night? Because that's the period of being a prisoner in Auschwitz. That's night. He emerges to freedom, and he calls his sequel Dawn, right? And that's the trope of servitude, suffering, and redemption. So the hostages that are coming out of uh, the Hamas, they talk about being in the dark, quite literally. They were held in tunnels, they were held in darkness, and now they're in daylight. It's not a metaphor here, it's an actual fact that by being brought out, they're being brought out into daylight. Part of their physical medical recovery is related to having been shielded from light, from sunlight. They've not been out in sunlight for 15 months. They've gotten very, very little light. Human beings are not like plants. However, if you deprive a human being from sunlight, there, and maybe Bob, you'll corroborate this. Sunlight activates your vitamin D. Sunlight, you can get very, very sick if you're deprived of sunlight over long, long periods of time, and that has to do with just the eyes, with the vitamins in your body that are activated, etc. It's a dark period, quite literally. Okay, so let's go on. Okay. So I just quoted the verse here, Leil Shimurim. It's a nice, interesting, structure. Leil Shimurim, well, it's a night of watching. So God watches them on this night. God keeps watch on them to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Hu halayla hazeh, and the Haggadah picks up halayla hazeh, halayla hazeh. This is this night, this Ladonai Shimurim. It's a night for God of keeping watch for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. And I make the point that, it's God that kept watch over the people. And the reciprocal ritual for us is that we kind of watch over this night. We keep guard over this night. I guess it would mean that the night of the Seder ought to be all night long, which for some people it is. Even in the Haggadah itself, we had the students, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, etc. They're sitting in Bnei Brak and they're talking about the exodus from Egypt all night long, until the morning. That's when their students come in and say it's time to say the morning Shema. So they're talking and talking and talking all night. And again, you have to ask yourself, well, what's going on here? Why are they experiencing it at night? Are they trying to reenact something? Are they trying to recreate something? Or are they trying to, live inside a zone that is a transitional zone? And if that's the case, then are we supposed to reenact that method of transition from servitude to freedom by moving through a night and getting up, and emerging at the dawn? To me, it makes a lot of sense to do that, but one can understand why, Judaism didn't enforce that, right? It would say something in the halacha like say on Passover you have to stay up all night and talk about it all night, and then then you can go to bed. That would make no sense. It's a completely unenforceable rule. We have the custom of staying up all night for uh, Shavuot, but that's such a later custom in Judaism. We every year when we talk about this at Shavuot, we remind our participants that the reason why we have the Tikkun El Shavuot is because it emerged exactly at the same time, coincidentally, as the proliferation of coffee in Europe and throughout the world. So, what a surprise, right? That people are drinking coffee and enjoying coffee, and they are able to remain awake for a whole night. And those of us who enjoy a cup of coffee know that we really shouldn't drink coffee past a certain hour, because if you drink a cup of coffee past a certain hour, then you might stay up all night. Or coffee has an effect on our circadian rhythm, which is the one bad thing about coffee. There's only one bad thing about coffee. Okay. So, and this verse, Adonai Shimurim, it has a beautiful structure, but we're not going to go into it. Look at how the Torah frames the the commandment to observe Passover. This is already in the book of Dvarim. Now, in the book of Dvarim, it's always about pilgrimage. The festivals are framed as these are the times you're supposed to come up to the place that God chooses. Keep the month of Aviv. Aviv is Hebrew for ripe grain. Okay, so we have an echo of the harvest agricultural element of the holiday. You are to observe the Passover to God, your God. For in the month of Aviv, God, your God, took you out of Egypt at night. Hotziacha Adonai Elohecha mimitzrayim laila. Now, I always find that verse to be, it's like, what do you mean by this? Right? It doesn't tell you, um, here at least, it doesn't say keep this night or keep the 14th night of the month of Aviv. It says God took you out of Egypt at night. So if you're listening to this, if you are, someone who is, going to review commandments all the time, what you're saying is I have to I have to put in my mind the experience that this is both the real night and a metaphorical night. God took you out at night. And I'm always, I'm going to cast my imagination to a long night through which the Israelites move from Egypt to, to where they move to Sukkot and to other places, and they get there after night. And so it's obvious to me that this is a transition. I'm always focused on boundaries. I think, those are the most interesting places in a kind of in the ritual sphere and the anthropological sphere, how you define both time and space. So time boundaries are defined by sunrise and sunset. And so in the evening, we have servitude. In the morning, we have redemption. That's basically the theme of Deuteronomy. Okay. You are to sacrifice the Passover offering to God from flock and herd in the place that God chooses. You are not to eat it with leaven. 7 days you are to eat it. For with trepidation you went out from Egypt. Ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Yisrael. He translates chipazon as trepidation. Chipazon means, you were in a rush. We left in hurriedly, in order that you be leman tiskor ediyom tzedcha me'eretz Yisrael kol yemei chayecha. So this is complicated. You have to remember the day that you left Egypt, all the days of your life. You can see why that gives rise to a certain discussion in the Haggadah that's very, we all remember. You know, Ben Zoma says, I didn't understand this until, I heard this line, and that said, Kol Yemei Chayecha Hayamim, Kol Yemei Chayecha Halelot. You have to remember you have to remember the Exodus at daytime. You have to remember it at nighttime. This world, that next world. That you can see how this verse is complicated and it needs to be interpreted. Well, what does it mean to remember the Exodus every day? It happened on a certain day. When we say the word day, we could also mean, it happened that day, that night, So the rabbis, as usual, are trying to really pin down, and they make a very important, you know, teaching on this, that the the idea of redemption has to accompany us throughout our lives, morning, noon, and night, at all times. We are to remember this all the time. That's what it's saying, basically. Kol yamei chayecha means all the time. And then they say it also means in the world to come. In the world to come, you'll still need to remark on your redemption. Okay? I'm going to skip this. This is the next day. They marched from Sukkot. They camped at Etam. God was going before them by day as a column of cloud to lead them the way, by night as a column of fire to give light to them, to be able to go by day and by night. There would not retire the column of cloud by day or the column of fire by night from the people. All right. So now we're into our parsha. Okay, this week we have we have a picture. The Israelites moving at night. They get to Sukkot, they bake their bread, and they have a moment, a period of kind of rest. They can kind of, stop for a minute, eat for a minute, replenish themselves, but then they're going to go on. Okay? But as soon as they go on, what happens? Well, we now have the a system of guardianship over the people, with the column of cloud by day and the column of fire by night. It's the same column, but during the day it's a cloud, and during the night it's a fire. Okay, why? Because you can't see cloud at night. You can see fire at night, and but you can see the cloud during the day. So it's a fire enclosed cloud, or cloud enclosed. It's this kind of apparition. Exactly where it appears is a big question. It's going in front of the people from before the people. So we have to imagine You know, the visuals here are very enticing. The Torah is telling us that the people is a large mass of people, and in front of us is this pillar of fire cloud, okay? And it's fire at night. The Egyptians pursued them and overtook them and camped by the sea. They get to the sea, and the Egyptians are coming. How do they know that they're coming? Well, they can hear them, but they can also see them. They can see them because it's daylight. All of Pharaoh's chariot horses, his riders, and his army by Piachirot before Barzaphon. As Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes. Now here, Egypt marching after them. They were exceedingly afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to God. So if they lift up their eyes and see this, we are imagining that there's enough light for them to see this. It's very hard in pitch black to see a marauding army of soldiers chasing after you, but you can see it if we're in the daytime. So they complained to Moses. Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us out to die in the wilderness? We've talked about it in previous years, the birth of Jewish humor. What now have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? What are you doing? Is this not the very word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve Egypt? Indeed, Tov lanu avodat Mitzrayim umutenu Israel. It's better to go for us to serve Egypt than die in the wilderness. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, stand fast and see God's deliverance, which he will work for you, hayom, today. For as you see Egypt, hayom, today, you will never see it again for the ages. He's speaking to them in daytime, okay? In broad daylight. God's deliverance is going to be for you in daytime, in daylight. Now what happens? So God says to Moses, why do you cry out to me? We have lots and lots of interpretation about this, but this is not on my theme here. God said, the people are complaining to Moses, and Moses probably brings the complaint to God. And God says, enough. Why tell them to go. Let them march forward. Hold your staff high, stretch out your hand over the sea, and split it, so that the children of Israel may come through the midst of the sea upon dry land. So, is this happening at daytime or nighttime? We will see in a second. While I hear, I will make Egypt's heart strong-willed. They will come out. So that they come in after them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his riders. V'yadu Mitzrayim, and the Egyptians shall know that I am God when I am glorified through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his riders. The messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved on and went behind them. The column of cloud moved ahead of them and stood behind them. Now it's getting complicated. So it's a column of cloud, so this is daytime. The column of cloud comes from before them and kind of moves behind. It's a shift, okay? So the narrator here is noting for us that what was in front of them to lead the way for them is now behind them. Why would it be behind them? Because it's going to be a barrier between the rear of the Israelites and the advancing Egyptians. So the cloud is going to function as the protective barrier between Egypt coming after them and Israel, who is vulnerable. And came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. Vayianan ve'achoshech. Here were the cloud and the darkness. Whoa, what is going on now? So the cloud is there. We know the cloud is daytime, but now there's darkness. And of course, Vayar et halayla, this cloud is lighting up the evening. V'lo karav zeh el zeh kol halayla, and this one did not come near this one all night. So how is the cloud lighting up the evening? Because the cloud is now fire. And the fire cloud is between Israel and Egypt. And that is what is protecting the Israelites at their rear and from the advancing Egyptians. The Egyptians see this apparition of a fire cloud, right? And they are back, and it's nighttime. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea. When does he do this? Vayolech Adonai et hayam beruach kadim aza kol halayla. It's all night long he does this. Now, uh, how long, this is the question. For how long does he hold out his hand? Is he going to hold out his hand all night long for hours and hours and hours? Or is he putting it, for a short period of time? We don't know. But it's definitely at night because it says, Kol halayla, vayolech Adonai et hayam beruach kadim aza kol halayla, all night. Vayasem et hayam lecharava vayabaku hamayim, and made the sea into firm ground, thus the waters were split. So everybody has to take the movie out of their head and read this and understand that this pushing of the water into dry land to make the water split is not happening in a split second over the course of, in the movie, it's, a few seconds where the wind comes and then, special effects, which is a tank of Jello in the movie, and they move the water to make it walls. And it's you should read the Wikipedia on how they made the sea split in the movie The Ten Commandments. Fascinating, early form of special effects, but it makes it look like it happened over the space of a minute, maybe a half a minute. But this is a space of a long time. It's lots and lots of wind. So it's over the course of an evening. It's terrifying. And we know, I mean, we all have memories now of the hurricane, right? Um, and the superstar Sandy, right? Remember that evening? It was an evening of I don't want to say sheer terror, but it was frightening when you heard the wind. The wind was so fierce, so strong. I remember sitting in my living room listening to this and hearing, people who, there were windows flapping because for some reason a person was away or whatever, or something got loose on someone's house, and there were windows shattering, and I could see even from my house, flashes of light, which weren't lightning. It was the flashes of light of transformers blowing. You could see that on the horizon, and it was really over the course of an evening. It was quite terrifying. Okay, so this is what's happening. The wind is blowing. Moses is standing there holding it for a period of time that's not disclosed. The waters split. The children of Israel came through the midst of the sea upon the dry land. The waters were a wall for them on their right and on their left. Now, I'm not, I don't have a doctorate in Bible, but this verse here feels like it's a marker here. It feels like it's just a little out of place because they're not in yet. They haven't gone in. This is literally framing the story. And we're going to hear this, refrain again. But the Egyptians pursued and came in after them. So it's telling us that they're going in. The Egyptians are coming in after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his riders in the midst of the sea. Vayhi bashmonat haboker. Now it was at the daybreak watch. Vayashkef Adonai al machane Mitzrayim b'amud esh ve'anan vayahom et machane Mitzrayim. And God looked out against the camp of Egypt in the column of fire and cloud, and he panicked the camp of Egypt. So then you say, what did I just read? The people are in the sea, but it's dry land. The Egyptians are coming after them. Are they coming after them in the sea? But there's the cloud that's between Israel and Egypt, and it's daybreak now at the daybreak watch, which means just a few, a period of time before sunrise. God looks against the camp, So they're are they a camp? Are they camped? Are they in in the sea? He panicked the camp of Egypt. So they they're stunned by God. We don't know how God stuns them with the pillar of fire, Va'anan, Bamud Esh Va'anan. So it's still nighttime, but also coming towards morning. He loosened the wheels of his chariots and made them drive with heaviness. Egypt said, I must flee before Israel, for God does battle for them against Egypt. So the wheels are coming off their chariots. Then God said to Moses, stretch your hand over the sea, and the waters shall return upon Egypt, upon its chariots, upon its riders. So wait a second. Does that mean that Moses is on the other side already? I guess so. So they got to the other side, and they're seeing the Egyptians chase them. This is morning already. At morning, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The sea returned. Vayashov hayam lifnot boker. Should have highlighted that here. In the face of daybreak, le'etano. Umitzrayim nasim likrato. And the Egyptians were fleeing toward it, toward the sea, toward the shore. Vayina'er Adonai et Mitzrayim betoch hayam, and they shook the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Okay, so we're gonna just put one more verse here, maybe two. The waters returned; they covered the chariots and the riders of all the Pharaoh's army that had come after them into the sea. Not even one of them remained. But Israel had gone upon dry land through the midst of the sea, the waters a wall for them on their right and on their left. So God delivered Israel on that day from the hand of Egypt. Israel saw Egypt dead by the shore of the sea, and Israel saw the great hand that God wrought against Egypt. The people held God in awe. They trusted in God and in Moshe, his servant. And then sang Moshe and the children of Israel this song to God. I'm going to stop there, okay? Because we don't need to really go through the text here to try and do a slight rewind. All of this happened at night. All the Moses stood in the evening. The fire cloud is between Israel and Egypt. He stands at one shore of the sea. He holds his hand over the sea. The sea splits into dry land after a period of time that's, in my opinion, more than a few seconds, as it is in the movie. And the people walk through, and Egypt tries to come in. They advance onto the dry land, onto some of the dry land, but they are not able to get beyond a certain place because of the pillar cloud. When Israel gets to the other side, it's already towards morning. The Egyptians are in there. Moses stands over the sea on the other side, holds his hand over the sea on the other side, and closes the sea over the Egyptians. And it's as the sun is rising, the Egyptians drown and they die in the sea. And the Israelites are on the other side in the sunrise, and they exult in having been delivered. They see with awe and also terror the Egyptian laid waste in the sea. And it's at that point that the Torah tells us that Moses began his song of redemption, Az Yashir Moshe, the song that we know of as the Song of the Sea. In terms then of the clock, all of this happens as day breaks. Daytime, the morning, is redemption. Ba'erev Yalim Bechi, I'll quote that verse in a second. The evening, we go down in tears, V'la boker rina. But in the morning, we have joy. All right, I'll pause here if you have any observations, questions, or rebuttals, or other kinds of, associated. Go ahead, Lana.
It just reminds me on the seventh Makkah, the
Yes,
seventh plague, the relationship between the barad, the hail, and the ash, the fire, which is a good relationship.
sure.
They work well together.
They work well together. That was my last week's study. We talked about, or 2 weeks ago. Last week was it was 2 weeks ago. The plague of Barad, the seventh of the 10, and how that there was a nes b'toch nes. Okay, so we have this, as a motif that's running through this story. Um, and I asked myself the following question, which is, well, why does it work as a motif? Um, is it a biblical motif, or is it a universal motif? So, with your permission, we're just gonna slide through a few sources here, okay? And I'm gonna show you that, okay, so there are things that we have already kind of been kind of inoculated with. If you recall creation, "Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lachoshen kara layla vayirav vayiboker yom echad." So if you read that, the way we read it, every year without paying too much attention to it. But there's an idea here. The idea here is that something vayerev, it ends, vayiboker, that when you have the new morning, that demarcates the previous day, and that it means that there's one day. We are so used to thinking, and I gave a sermon on this last Rosh Hashanah. We're so used to thinking that, in Jewish time things start in the evening, and of course that's the way it does halakhically. But in the Bible, it's slightly different. In the Bible, the new day starts with the sunrise of the next day. Yom Echad means we have finished one day. And how did we finish one day? Vayerev, it sets. Vayiboker Yom Echad. The morning designates that the previous time is a day. Okay? And that's all the interplay of day and night. I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But when we have the Noah story, Noah, you recall that Noah sends a dove, and the dove found no resting place. And then there was water upon the face of the earth. He sent it forth his hand, took her, brought her to the ark. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove again. The dove came back to him at eventime. All right. The dove is coming back because it doesn't have a place to go at the evening. And here, a freshly plucked olive leaf in her beak. But the dove at evening has this little branch. And that emerges for us as a kind of hope, because in the evening, the dove has the branch, and the branch signals to Noah, I guess there's a tree out there, and that means that some of the water has receded. Noah knew that the waters have subsided. He waited another 7 days, sent out the dove. She returned to him again, no more. And so it was in the 601st year, in the beginning of the month, the first day of the month, that the waters left firm ground upon the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and saw the face of the ground. When? What time of the day? Evening? Morning. 1 second, Annette. Had dried up. The second month, the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. God spoke to Noah and say, "Go out of the ark, you, all your wife, your son's wife with you, and living things that are with you, and the flesh, birds, animals, etc., that they may bear fruit." Noah went out, all living things. Noah built an altar, etc., etc., etc. I will never, God promises, I will never strike down all living things as I have done, never again. All the days of the earth shall sowing and harvest, cold and hot, summer and day and night shall never cease. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a second and say, it never tells us specifically what time of the day Noah gets out of the ark. However, okay, if I were writing a commentary on this, I would do a better job than I'm doing now. I would find whatever hint I can And here I'll borrow any method of gematria or mysticism or Kabbalah to pin it down. I don't have a satisfactory textual basis for this other than he opens the window. Okay? And why do we relate to this? Because everybody has had the experience of trying to air out your house in the morning. And what you do in the morning, you open your window, you open the skylight, and that's the morning. He comes out. It makes to me literary sense that he would come out in the morning. Now, my only conjecture as to why it doesn't tell us this is one thing, which is the Torah doesn't want to make the sun into a object of worship. So it doesn't mention the word shemesh in the story. And because of that, we are not going to have any mention of this or anything connected to it. Uh, but I'm going to leave that and say requires further study. Okay. There are a couple of other places where we actually have explicitly mourning. Jacob, after his dream, he sets the stone at his head, and he wakes up in the morning, and he says, after he had this dream, I'm going to, this is the place this will be the gate of heaven, or this will be, you know, Bethel, he names it. When he wrestles with the assailant, he is alone. He wrestles with the man until the coming of dawn. All right. And then we have the curse at the end of Deuteronomy. You will not trust you'll be terrified at night and day. You will not trust in the security of your life. At daybreak, you will say, would that make sunset. At sunset, you will say, who would make it daybreak? We want this redemption. Redemption comes with the morning. Psalm 30, he is angry for a moment. When he is pleased, there is life. One may lie down and weeping at nightfall, but at dawn there are shouts of joy. Psalm 90, lots and lots of imagery with Psalm 90. You engulf men in their sleep. At daybreak, they are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak, it flew. Baboker yatzitz v'chalaf. Sab'enu vaboker chazdecha uneranana v'nismecha b'chol yameinu. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all of our days. We're going to always, be redeemed in the morning. And this theme, of course, wraps its way all the way through the Bible. Okay, with your permission, I want to just do a couple of things. I thought that there may be a few interesting depictions of this in films. So as usual, I dialed up the Chat GPT, the AI. I said, what films have this theme of mourning for redemption? The Shawshank Redemption is a moment where he leaves at night. He leaves at night. I'm sorry. I hope you can hear that. I'm going to stop sharing you. Put the sound on for a second to ensure you get the sound. Try that again. Where at the Shawshank Redemption, when he makes the escape, I hope I don't spoil the film for you because we've only seen it 16 times. All right. Again, he leaves at night. This is the middle of the night. Okay. And that's the next morning.
Right about the time Raquel was spilling her little secret, a man nobody ever laid eyes on before strolled into the Maine National Bank. Until that moment, he didn't exist.
All right, so it's such a brilliant film. You know what happens? He escapes at night, and then the character narrating this says, the next morning he has his redemption. And the redemption is he goes to the bank and he cashes the checks of the warden, the corrupt warden, who, has been so abusive to him, but he was the accountant and he took all the money and deposited it in fake accounts and created a fake, it's so brilliant. The Stephen King, beautiful story. And it's dawn as redemption for the dusk, the transition of the dusk. There's another example of this. I'm not so expert in this movie, but you will see this movie here, which is The Lion King at the end. So, whatever happens before, it's nighttime, and then we have the morning sunrise and redemption. This is all redemption. At the ending, where the Lion King gets to be, there we go, we'll salute the king, right? And there he is, the new Lion King. Okay? Boom. Okay. You get the point. And this is it's something we don't even have to, review because we just understand it intuitively based on the rhythm of our lives. But it's imprinted now in the Torah, and it's in religion. It's in the way we observe the Torah. It's the way we reenact it. And this is the reenactment that happens at the Seder. The Seder, the showcase of redemption is the evening. And what are we doing in the evening? Well, we're trying to reenact the meal that, in my opinion, they didn't have, okay? And we're trying to reenact the meal that was commemorated at the temple, which they did have, right? And we're trying to reenact the conversation around the meal, and we're trying to reenact, on an annual basis, transition from one state of of downness to a state of redemption. Now, I guess, what this is saying is you should stay up all night and you should go through this experience throughout the night. But that's not going to happen. Okay? And I think, the rabbis knew that we were dealing with a real people, and real people need to sleep. And most of us, need to sleep. So we end up staying, we end up pretending that it's throughout the night by going fairly late. It's a meal that ends later than most meals. We start at sunset. We end it later, and that becomes the symbolic representation of transition from evening to morning. Okay, and that's the theme. How all of these moments you can, if you look and read closely in these biblical stories, you can see when there's evening and there's morning, there's a different drama going on, the drama of servitude and redemption or future. But that's a universal theme as well. Now, I saw a hand before. Nanette, you had your hand. Well, you have to unmute.
Okay. So, hey, Rabbi, I feel a tiny bit confused, or maybe I don't. So it seems to me that we have to understand God as he favors the Jewish people. If you do wrong, he's going to murder you, like in Noah. He sent the flood. In this Parsha, he did the waters with the Egyptians. But yet the Nile, which is water, he favored saving baby Moses. I mean, he made sure things were, nicey schmicey. So, I mean, what do we think about God and like what's happening?
Well, look, the motif of water is a very important motif in the story as well. Moses is taken out of the water, and Moses is named Moses because he was taken out of water, and that is definitely a foreshadowing that Moses will take the people out of the water. Yes, these are significant ideas, and unrelated to night and day and time, but we could trace the motif of water through these stories as well. Yeah, no, it's a good point. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a literary question of sort
Yes,
and then a comment. That is, in looking at the text you presented today, vision is particularly powerful. See
yes,
this, observe this, watch this.
yes.
Previous text is very auditory, call, tell, talk. And I'm wondering if you think that there's any significance to talk using the visual mode versus the auditory mode at this parts of the Torah.
So it's a good point. The Bible does play with these the way we receive information, and that'll be evident, especially 2 weeks from now during the Parsha of Yitro at Mount Sinai, where it's you know there's they actually see there's this experience of what we call synesthesia. They see the sound. Okay. And overwhelmingly, by the time we get to the book of Deuteronomy, it's Shema, Shema, listen, listen. Although there's also see there. So the fact that there is visual here, my attempt at answering this is the visual is the stronger, more immediate experience. Um, and I can just speak in terms of the way we relate to visual information and visual stimuli. The fact I keep mentioning this the movie means that the visual had a tremendous effect on me, but it has an effect on the whole culture, right? The fact that it's depicted in this way means that for all intents and purposes, people who have very little exposure to the Bible think that Moses looked like Charlton Heston. Or if you are someone who appreciates, Renaissance art, and you happen to be a tourist in Rome, and you go to the church St. Pietro in Vicolo in Rome, and you see the statue of Moses, you think that Michelangelo got it right. And if you see a photograph of it or a postcard of it, you'll think that Moses, this is what Moses looked like, a long big beard, a big austere, and all the other things. The visual is very powerful. And there's a reason why the Bible kind of tilts to the auditory, is because the auditory enables you to create your own image rather than have an image created for you. If you create your own image, you're less likely to make other people worship in that.
No,
But if you, yeah, go ahead.
I mention this because if everything's happening in the dark, I wonder if they had night goggle vision to be able to see everything going on. So
Yeah.
it was a contradiction as I'm reading this through as to how do you see in the dark.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
So,
it's complicated. In that way, you are seeing by the light reflected off of the pillar of cloud or pillar of light.
thank you.
So there we have John. Okay, go ahead.
So on the subject of vision, the importance of vision and what you hear, I think in Deuteronomy it says explicitly you did not see anything. I
Yeah,
think talking about the Sinai experience.
right. No, you're in Nechem Haro. You saw this. You saw this. It does say explicitly that you saw. Um, and again, because these were powerful, powerful images. I saw another hand there. Was there another hand? Okay. So just a note. We are